And a very warm welcome to all of you watching us from wherever you are around the world. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Louise Eklund. I am a British journalist, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be your host and your guide for what is the very first, the digital version of the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine Congress. Lives 2020 it's called, a new format for this very particular year. The COVID-19 pandemic has really put the ICM in the spotlight this year, the society of course, but also on its healthcare workers. Today, thanks to our speakers and our honourable guests, we will be seeing how this specific COVID context impacted ICM, of course. And now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the president of the society, Joseph Kese-Giolu. Nice to see you. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Great to see you. And also we have the ESICM president-elect, Maurizio Cecconi. Good afternoon to you as well.
Good afternoon.
Are you good?
I'm very excited to be here.
Great. Joseph, first of all, over to you for some opening words, I think.
Well, I can start saying that obviously we have a very special and a difficult year behind without knowing how far we will go with it under the circumstances that we had with COVID-19. The hope and the wish was to see all our members face to face in a congress in Madrid. But let's be optimistic, because digital congress has also its charms and advantages, which we will be experiencing in the coming years. However, I would like to mention the huge impact of the COVID-19 pandemics on our society. Not only with our patients, which we tried our best to save their lives when we were confronted with huge number of them needing us, but also the nurses, physicians and other healthcare professionals were really having a big challenge. And the challenge we can explain in many different ways, but I would like to summarize in a way that they had their responsibility to take care of their patients, but they also had the responsibility to take care of their families and loved ones. And there was a big challenge in finding the balance between them. Also, we were faced with a lot of shortages, which actually caused us to change our norms, the norms that we are educated with, the norms which we are living for, and we actually were confronted with the situation that we were not able to exercise where we are trained for, and that made a lot of damage in the mental well-being of our colleagues. Well, having said that, I would also like to give a special tribute to our colleagues who got very ill during this period, and also even some colleagues who lost their lives after caring for their patients.
Thank you, Joseph. These were very uncertain times, Maurizio.
Yeah, they were, especially at the beginning. And we were all committed to give the best to our patients, but this was a new virus. We didn't know it was very easy to transmit, to get infected. So we were all scared at the beginning, and we wanted to protect also our families. So many of us separated from our families at the beginning. The good thing, though, is that, through the challenges of COVID-19, we also learned that with proper training and proper personal protective equipment, we know that intensive care units have actually been a very safe environment, and we can protect our healthcare workers. So now we feel more confident in carry on with this challenge.
Let's talk a little bit more about this digital format today. Yeah. Joseph.
Well, it's something new for our society, but it has also been new to many other societies as well, as we had to change all our understanding of organizing a digital congress. But also it provided us some advantages, as I said, and we also feel that we will be reaching to more people worldwide due to the nature of this congress. That's why I would like actually to acknowledge all my colleagues who have been giving a lot to have this prepared, and also from our executive committee colleagues who took the responsibility to reach to this day and who were extremely helpful and proactive in taking care of the whole situation.
Of course. So 2020 was indeed a very, very complicated year for everybody, all of you watching us around the world, a situation like no other. Tell us how you led the society.
Well, actually, first of all, we have stuck to our own values. That is also embedded in our names. It is the linking innovation, vision, excellence and science. The only important thing we had to do was to readjust our way of thinking, to have a change of mindset. And still doing that, we still focused on our values, as I said. And if I have to summarize it very shortly, instead of complaining about the wind, we have readjusted our sails to this difficult wind of 2020.
Nobody wanted a pandemic. We had to deal with it.
No, nobody wanted a pandemic, but we just had to accept it. And I agree with Joseph. I think what kept us on track was the fact that we had strong values in the society, in our community. And we had to use this to react as a leadership in this crisis. You know, in a crisis, you cannot just act normally. You have to understand that there is a lot of uncertainty. You have to look at the data that you had out there, and you need to take this data and take some quick actions and communicate this uncertainty and have some clear common goals. And I'm not talking just about us for the leadership of the society. I'm talking about the leadership that the community has shown in hospitals, in healthcare systems around the world. There was a common goal in this pandemic from our community, which was to give an ICU bed to whoever would benefit from an ICU bed, COVID and non-COVID.
I think you should actually say that the real nature of the people, you see it in a crisis. And with that, I can emphasize that the intensive care community has passed this test so far.
Okay. So this was the starting point, but how did you actually respond to the crisis? I mean, what did you put in place?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not a secret that no one had any perception at the beginning of it, last January or February, that this could be such a violent and overwhelming situation. I mean, I can remember our jokes about which Congress we would still be attending somewhere at the middle of the year, or we were in a denial phase whether it would be possible to have face-to-face congresses. I mean, at a certain moment, the recognition comes, and that is very heavy. But once we recognized it, we took immediate action, and then we had to choose the actions, what to do first. And actually, we have chosen to educate people on this, because there were so many unknown things with COVID-19. There are still a lot of unknown things, but if I compare now the situation at the beginning of the year, I mean, we did not know anything. That's why we have thought, educate, educate, and educate, but with the right knowledge, because we have seen a lot of beliefs at the beginning of the year using this medication, and that medication did not have any effect. What we tried was to really choose the right knowledge to send to the people right from the beginning.
And it was a time where maybe you feel a bit vulnerable, I guess, as well.
Well, especially at the beginning, you know, we realized very, very early that we were not prepared. You know, when the crisis started in Europe, it was the end of February. And just a few days before, we were together with colleagues from all around the world in America, looking at what was happening in China. And I know that there was no awareness of something like this happening so fast, you know, in our units, in our countries outside of China. I really think that's what we probably recognized as a society. I was in the epicenter in Milan, in Lombardy. I was speaking very often with Joseph and saying, this is difficult. You know, what we are seeing is fast. It can overwhelm any system if the spread of the virus is not contained. We need to get people this warning. So we need to tell people to get ready, because a few hours, a few days to get ready can make a difference.
And how did you do that?
Well, I mean, how did you do that? Well, I have talked with Mauricio a lot and got a lot of tips.
Yeah.
But just mentioning about our reaction, how fast we were, if I remember correctly, the first patient was admitted in Lombardy region on the 20th of February. Our webinar was exactly 6 days later. So this shows, I mean, I mentioned we had a lot of surprise, but once we were at it, we acted very, very fast.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about this webinar? How did it go? It must have been a...
Well, we have been, we were very naive actually at that time because, I mean, our society has also certain facilities, and we thought we organized the webinar with our own facilities. I think within a few minutes after the start of the webinar, we started to receive messages after each other that the system was almost crashed because there were in the first webinar, which was 1 hour, there were 2,000 people trying to get in, and our system was absolutely not ready because we were thinking maybe 100 people, 200 maximum, and then once we saw that, that was a lesson, and after that we had completely reorganized our webinars and the way how to do these things.
But it was a learning also because, you know, that was with China, with an expert from China, was Bindu.
Bindu, yeah.
And he was very kind to share information and knowledge from the very beginning. You know, in Europe, the crisis started. We needed information. We were craving for information. So we've asked him to help us. And so, you know, he gave this presentation, but at some point the presentation broke a bit. So we were talking on the slides and trying to get all the information that he gave to us, to our members. It was a bit of a stressful experience.
Yeah, it was stressful, but then of course we didn't stop there. We have performed the marathon webinars and also with regular webinars, and these were going perfectly due to the measures we have taken. We had also webinars on Alive for the low and middle income countries.
What's Alive? Can you tell us about it?
Alive is a fund of the society. This fund we use for the training of the physicians and nurses in low and middle income countries. Mm-hmm. For example, we have been recently, when the traveling was still possible, given courses in Uganda, Pakistan, in Barbados for sepsis and septic shock in order to improve the knowledge in these countries, especially the basic knowledge that they can use for their daily patient care.
Okay, so you put, from what I can gather, a lot of actions in place. How were they received? I mean, I read that you had 145,000 people for the marathon in more than 100 countries, which is quite impressive, and more than 600,000 views on a webinar that you on the webinars regrouped, organized. I mean, they're quite impressive figures.
Yes, I think we were also even impressed when we saw these figures, but it also shows a little bit what I said a moment ago, the lack of knowledge and the hunger to have information of people, intensivists or physicians or nurses from other specialisms. And we had also quite a good collaboration with our sister societies. There has been relations built on trust for many years with other organizations that we have contact with. And of course, it should also be mentioned that this trust is not built up in 1 year. This is something with a potential of many, many years, the great work of our predecessors, and that's why we are thankful for them.
And it was important to have this trust because there was so much information at the beginning and people didn't know what to trust. Yeah. And as a scientific society, we felt that we had the duty to filter this information and to pass this information. So, you know, we were overwhelmed by the number of emails and messages at the beginning of saying, please carry on with the webinars, we need more of this. And I think we accepted that appeal and try to pass as much information as we could.
What I hear is that you had a solid pre-COVID network beforehand. What makes ESICM so special, particular? Joseph?
Well, what makes a society? The members really make the society, and the connection of the members with each other make the society. And I can proudly say that we are a European society, but we have members from 120 different countries on each continent. We have nurses, we have intensivists from all different backgrounds. We have other healthcare professionals in our society. After saying that, I would like also to focus on the nurses because 2020 is a special year for the nurses, and I would like to give a few special word of thanks to all the nurses and allied healthcare professionals who have played such an essential role during the pandemic. And our society also at this moment offers education and learning than ever before to the nurses with workshops and master classes.
Okay.
And I would like to say, to address them with the words that we value your inclusion and the closer integration we have developed with you. Thank you.
Great. So all these networks, intensivists, how do you build on this community and how do you bring in the young people? Joseph?
Well, we have the next. Next is a group, a very important group with quite a number of members who represent the younger generation, the younger members of the society.
Next, they're called?
Next, they are called indeed, like
next generation.
And I would like. I'm also very happy to mention that the next group have already proved and showed great leadership during the pandemic, and they are all heavily involved in all of our actions, webinars, and educational programs. And they continue to drive innovation and creativity to the society.
Maurizio, how do you see the next generation in the future of the society?
Well, they are incredibly important. You know, they are important for the present. You know, they've been the glue sticking together the network of intensive care units in Europe. We had fellowship programs. They were traveling all the time. Now, unfortunately, with COVID, we had to stop that. But because they are young and they know how to use technology, they use digital tools to stay connected. I really think the society stay connected also thanks to their leadership. So I'm confident that we will see leadership in the society thanks to the generation of next that we see now.
As the main European society representing intensivists, I know you have a very strong relationship with the European Union. What was the trigger, Joseph?
Actually, we started way before the COVID-19 was hitting us. We had actually seen all these years that the training of intensive care in Europe is not homogeneous, which means that people have different way to become intensivists, and due to this inhomogeneity, free movement of intensivists are not easy. It's different than other specialities. That's why we have been applying to European Union, also before the crisis, but also during, for a more homogeneous training which will enable the free movement of the intensivists. That's why we also have asked them to be included in the Annex 5, which is the framework for the recognition of specialists in European Union state, and it is really the base for the free movement of medical professionals in Europe. This is how it was starting, but during our contact, we also offered them our services so that we could help them to prepare for the second wave in Europe, and this has led to the program C19 Space.
Okay, so C19 Space, Maurizio, can you tell us about it?
Yes, so C19 Space is the COVID-19 skill preparation course, but before talking about C19 Space, it's the point of saying what we've learned in this pandemic about ICU. First of all, that an ICU ventilator does not make an ICU bed. ICU beds are ICU people, are the healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, other healthcare workers that are looking after patients and their families. You cannot train specialists in a few days or in a few months. It's just not possible. But if you have a surge of ICU cases, you need to increase ICU beds. And for that, we got help from many doctors, nurses, and other professionals that do not work regularly in intensive care. So we try to pass this message to the European Commission, say you need to work on getting stock of drugs and devices and technologies, but let's not forget about people. Of course, the most important thing to fight a surge of ICU patients is actually to avoid one. So controlling the spread of the disease in the community is really what we advocate, even as an ICU community. So individual citizens can really help us a lot. The individual responsibility of face masks, hand washing, social distancing, it really is the attack that allows us to win against this challenge. ICUs, we like to say that they are the last line of defense, but if it happens, we need to train people. So C19 Space is a program which aims to give basic skills in intensive care to healthcare workers that do not work regularly in intensive care. And we were very happy that the European Commission decided to fund this program and to ask ESIC to prepare it and to deliver it.
Let's take a look at a film which will tell us a lot more about this program.
You are now in the corridor.
Your suggestion.
The CAM ICU score with the facial mask is
The system that we use. And to really be immersed.
So this must have been a major challenge, putting this all together. We've got the mask here with us on the set, which is quite impressive. Tell us a little bit more about how you put it all together.
It has been a major challenge.
Yeah.
So when they told us to do the program, we thought we had to do it in a very short period of time. So we got 70 experts across all of Europe, everyone in his own free time, putting together all the content. We have 24 hours of training between online, face-to-face, and virtual reality. It has been, an enormous effort, but it was great to see, how the community got together. And what you're seeing here is a virtual reality kit. So with your smartphone, you can basically be immersed in an intensive care. And the filming occurred in Milan. In my hospital, we built an intensive care unit for COVID in the summer. When we didn't have to use it, we got 20 experts, doctors, nurses from the society. Joseph and I, we were there. The funny thing, actually, Joseph and I, we met last time in Milan, just before the pandemic, and the first time we met after the first wave was again in Milan.
Yeah. Well, great experience anyway, putting it all together, I'm sure, and lots of people working for free, obviously, to put it together. I believe there's a goal of 10,000 people to be trained before the end of 2020. This must be the largest training program ever maybe put together in the healthcare domain, is that correct?
Well, as far as we know, it is the one of the largest educational program, and that makes us very proud, of course, to have done this with huge collaboration and a great teamwork. If I would like to elaborate a little bit on this, I would like to emphasize that this COVID-19 pandemic is an unprecedented disaster. I call it unprecedented not because we have not had disasters in the past, but this is something coming in big numbers, but we don't know when it is going to end. Normally with the disasters, things have happened, you have casualties, and you know that after a few weeks everything will stabilize. With this we have no slightest idea. Yet we have made the statement that We were unprepared the first time. That's certainly how it was. And we cannot be unprepared twice. That was our statement that we made months ago. Actually, with this project, we have actually shown that we have taken a very concrete action for the sake of preparedness.
Yeah.
I think this is that's why a very important issue.
Very
And
important.
focusing on people, not just technology.
Yeah.
Of course. We've spoken about the pandemic, of course, and the training program, but I guess activities continued as usual as you were going through this difficult phase.
Of course. Actually, we did not put things on hold. We just maintained them. We changed a lot of the things according to the necessities,
Yes.
and we have updated them because it needed a new sort of tackling the problem. Like the Congress, I mean, we are here now to open our digital Congress. We have completely different formats. The European Society of Intensive Care Medicine Academy is going on. Our EDIC exam, the master classes, they are all just continuing. We also assured that the research grants are unchanged, and this year we have allocated 225,000 euros like other years. Our communication, our social media has been very active, and of course our journal, the life is going on as usual, even though in a maybe more active way. And with that, I would like to say that we are extremely proud of our official journal, Intensive Care Medicine. It is most highly ranked journal in the category that it is devoted for, with an impact factor of 17.6, etc. And then this figure speaks for itself. And then this all thanks to the editor-in-chief, Giuseppe Citerio, and his team of editors for their contribution. I would also like to mention that our second journal, Intensive Care Medicine Experimental, has a new editor-in-chief now, and I would like to use this opportunity to welcome Nicole Ufermans and her editorial team. And we are really looking forward to see the journal growing under her leadership. I think to conclude, I think I would like to thank to all our educators, our faculty, our examiners for making this happen and maintaining our usual activities, and next to the ones that are COVID-19 related, of course, and helping us to continue to offer learning and development.
So it seems that you've been very, very busy. Let's talk about research now. In addition to the training as a major European society representing intensives, you've launched and supported lots of different research initiatives. Tell us about them.
Well, we have asked for a lot of grants as a society. We have endorsed quite a number of studies, also COVID-19 related important studies. We have endorsed them. And we have also designed studies coming right from the core of the society, one of them being the Unite COVID-19, where 4,500 cases have been included so far. And we also had an European Society of Intensive Care Medicine survey, which we have analyzed the prevalence of mental health problems in intensivists facing the COVID-19 outbreak. And these have delivered very important results. And I think these will be a very important contribution to the literature.
Maurizio, I'm turning to you now. I believe that data can be very, very valuable for care and research.
Right. Data is everything for us in medicine, in research as a scientific society. We were investing a lot in this before COVID, even if during this crisis you've seen how much data is important. So in the previous years we worked to establish data science as one of the key actions in our societies. We also have a new section which we established last year. And we started to work more and more to get people familiar with data. So data science is everything. It's about clinical data, the information that you get from the electronic medical records, from benchmarking in intensive care, going to more advanced techniques like machine learning and artificial intelligence that are coming to fruition. So we think it's important that we drive this data science revolution. And we started to organize meetings, for instance, in the previous 2 years, which we call datathons, where we bring people together to become familiar about this.
Okay, so how does a datathon work?
Well, you have to imagine a datathon as a friendly competition, sometimes not so friendly, but no, they like to compete. They are teams put together with clinicians, engineers, data scientists. We actually realized that we have a larger community that want to come and work with us in ESIC, which is indeed not just clinicians, but these engineers, these data scientists. And it's great to see how, coming from different backgrounds, you can put together something very effective as a team to try to answer a research question on a large database.
Maurizio, in a few days you're going to be leading the ESICM, and I know you've worked very, very closely with Joseph hand in hand, but could you give us maybe your vision for the months and years to come and tell us how you intend to continue to spread education and research all across the world?
Yes, but first of all, I would like to thank Joseph, because I really think that Joseph had the challenge to lead the society in what I think has been the most challenging year for the society since its birth. And it's been a real honor for me to work with him as a president-elect. The best thing you can hope as a president-elect is to have a president that is supporting your ideas and you start to work on your program before you're president. I was lucky really to have Joseph doing that. And I've learned a lot from him. You know, he was able in this challenging time to, to look at the uncertainty out there, to analyze the situation and to take very fast actions. And I really think we have a strong society and we survived this year and we thrived in this year really because of the leadership of Joseph. I want to carry on, and I think I'm inheriting a very strong society. In this unprecedented crisis, I really think the society has never been as strong as it is now, and it's thanks to the members of the society. So, we have a crisis. We have to try to come out of this crisis. We don't know for how long this crisis is going to last. We will stick to our values. That's very important for us. I know that the members will help us on this, but we also have to think ahead in the future for when the crisis will finish. So I'm working now already with the leadership of the society and listening to members to build a 5-year strategy to give a roadmap for the future for our society.
And if you had to summarize maybe in just one phrase how you see the society in the years to come, could you do that?
Well, my vision is for ESIC to be a worldwide society that fosters clinical excellence, research and education, and gives equal opportunities based on merit to everyone working in intensive care.
And do you think the society can do this despite the COVID challenge?
I think we've already started to see this transition. I think the society is already going in that direction. We've done a lot of things together in this year. I really think we're moving there. If you see even the membership, we are a European society, but almost 30% of our members now come from outside Europe. We are a diverse society. We are a multidisciplinary society. We are working more and more to give voices to the different parts of the society, and I think we have to carry on in that way, giving more voices to nurses, allied healthcare professionals, maybe members that are outside from Europe as well. But coming to diversity, I think it's very important. It's one of the key values that I had in my campaign as a president-elect. I put excellence, diversity, and innovation, and you can recognize that these are the values of ESIC. I think we realized a few years ago that we had a problem with diversity. Right. We didn't have enough young people, enough female leadership in our society. We moved a long way from that. If you see now the Congress and the Congress Committee and Armand Gibbs have done a great job on that. We moved over the last years from 15% of female speakers, which was clearly not enough, to I think now we will have something like 40%. I want to see this change also in the leadership of the society. I want to see young people and female especially thriving. We have to find ways to mentor them, to promote their nomination, to step up and get elected into officers' position as well.
You talked a little bit about a world society. What does that actually mean?
It means that I think we are a European core. We have a European core. But now the world is looking at us. We've shown that we can lead the ICM community worldwide. I think we've proven that this year. I'm very proud of it. I think we can carry on doing it. And I would like to conclude with a message of hope. Look what we've done in such a challenging year.
Yes.
It could be more challenging. I know we will be ready. But I also know that if we're being able to navigate in this storm and strong winds, we can do it even better with calm water.
Great. Need to be a good sailor. A moment to celebrate talent, of course. Can you introduce us to the Society Medals, Joseph?
Sure, it's one of the most important moments, of course, of our opening session. It's the Society Medal, and the Society Medal is awarded once a year during our annual Congress to someone who has made a significant contribution to the aims of the Society. And this year it will be awarded to a very inspiring colleague, a consultant nurse and an advanced critical care practitioner, Carole Boulanger, and I would invite you to watch this special tribute to Carole.
Carole's nature is quiet and unassuming. However, underneath this, she's the most kind, fair and compassionate nurse that I've ever met.
It's hard to summarize what she has accomplished for the society. There are so many projects that she initiated and so many projects that she lifted to a higher level.
She is a role model to not only myself but to the team. She has the highest of professional standards and always puts the patient first. We have learned so much from Carole.
However, she has one limitation. Carole is too humble, far too humble.
She's got so many qualities. She's wonderful, she's capable, she's inclusive, she's full of encouragement for those around her. Above all, she's humble. There's a saying that it's nice to be important, but as Carole knows, it's much more important to be nice.
But Carole's not only inspirational, she's also very passionate. And she's particularly passionate about education for ICU clinicians, for nurses and for doctors. She's been one of the key team leaders for the Enactic project, developing advanced practice competencies across Europe.
Carole is always prepared to go the extra mile if it helps the patients. She's extremely well respected by patients, relatives and staff alike for her clinical knowledge, skills and compassion.
I don't think she really appreciates how amazing she is, which is why I'm absolutely delighted that the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine has decided to recognise her achievements by awarding her the Society Medal for 2020.
The fact that she's been awarded with the Society Medal is right and proper, really, to express our gratitude, but also what should be reflected in the views of our membership. And I think that as our society moves forward, particularly under the banner of a properly diverse society, she will be viewed as in the vanguard, really, that pushed our society into the 21st and 22nd century.
Carole, you absolutely deserve this award, and from all your ICU family in Exeter, congratulations, and we are so proud of all your achievements.
I think she so deserves this award that the European Society is bestowing on her tonight, and I'm sure this will be the first of many other accolades and awards in the future.
Congratulations, Carole.
The warmest congratulations, Carole. This award is so richly deserved, but we know that you'll be receiving this on behalf of nurses across Europe. So from all of us, Carole, thank you to you for your inspiration, for your passion and for your commitment to the cause and your tireless work for the European Society.
Be well, my friends. Be proud of your medal, and I hope to see you soon in healthy conditions.
Well done, Carole.
Well done, Carole. I am so proud of you.
So Carole, well done. You certainly deserve it.
Well, even though from a digital distance, it's my honor and pleasure to present this medal to Carol for this great achievement. Carol, I would like you to welcome and invite to say a few words.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Maurizio. I'm speechless, really. This is a huge honour for me personally and professionally. And I'd really like to thank the Executive Committee and everybody at ESICM. I've learnt and enjoyed all my time thus far with the Society. And what the European Society has shown it is a truly multi-professional society. And it's been a real privilege so far, and I hope to continue working with you going forwards. Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Carol.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well, there's a lot of people around you that are very, very proud of you, Carol. So well done for you. Fantastic. And obviously the medal will come to you very, very soon. Maurizio, you have other prizes to hand out.
Yes, the awards have not finished. We also have the honorary memberships. These are memberships that are given to people that had a massive contribution to intensive care medicine. So I'm very pleased to announce the first honorary membership, Ruth Kleinpel. Ruth, are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
Congratulations, Ruth.
Thank you so much.
Nothing else you want to say to us?
Well, I most appreciate this recognition. You know, my years of collaboration with the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine and the Society of Critical Care Medicine, I'm just thrilled with the degree to which the two organizations are working together, and I most appreciate this recognition. So thank you so very much.
And all of that is thanks also to a lot of your work. So thank you and congratulations again. Our next membership goes to Pascal Gruber. Pascal, are you with us?
Yes, hi Maurizio.
Hi Pascal, how are you?
Thank you very much.
Well, Pascal, congratulations.
I'm good.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's a great honor to receive this award. Really want to thank members of the DPD chair and the executive committee of the ESICM for their support. I think we've achieved a huge amount in the last few years with the academy, and it's a real it's a real honor to receive this. Thank you very, very much.
So thank you, Pascal. And last but not least, Jeffrey Liebman. Jeff, are you connected with us?
Yes, thank you.
Congratulations, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Just a few words, if you don't mind. I think it is important to get peer recognition from local, regional, and international point of view, and this is essential from a personal perspective and also from role modeling standpoint. It is good for the younger clinician scientists to see their leaders do their work, be it clinical or research. With those words, I'd like to thank the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine for the honor and privilege of receiving this prestigious award. It is such a pity I could not be there with you in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Well deserved.
Congratulations, Jeff.
So a very big congratulations to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us. Joseph, it's over to you for some closing words before we hand over to Armand Gerbes, the chair of the Division of Scientific Affairs. Over to you.
Well, I can only wish to everybody to have fantastic 3 days and have a rich learning experience during our Congress. But I don't want to leave it like that, because I know how this Congress has been prepared, and I would like to use this opportunity to thank all those who made this possible, especially the Division of Scientific Affairs under the leadership of Armand Gerbes. In such a challenging year, they still made this possible with the help of the office.
Mm-hmm. So moving on, it's now time to welcome Armand. Come and join us. So Armand, it's really great to see you. First of all, how are you doing?
Thank you, very well.
Fantastic. So this year was a very particular year. We've said it quite a few times, with a lot of hesitation. How did you actually manage?
Well, I'm very happy that the Congress now takes place, because it had to be postponed. We originally planned it in October, and we had to postpone it, and it's now in December taking place, and I'm very happy to that. And we must realize it's only possible thanks to the support of our sponsors who stayed with us also in these difficult times.
So thank you very much for your support. So how did you organize this Congress?
Well, it was really a challenge, and to be honest, we had in February, the program was already made for approximately 90%, but that was planned for a normal Congress. And then there were the changing circumstances with the COVID epidemics, the pandemics, and there was a lot of uncertainty whether we would have a normal Congress or whether it would be a digital Congress or a hybrid Congress. So with the planning, we had to place money on several horses, in fact. And the challenge we faced was to develop something that not existed at this moment yet. So we organized a brainstorming meeting with the Congress Committee where we had many good ideas. And for myself, I wanted one question to be answered. Why would someone attend the Congress instead of watching a YouTube video? And the main answer was, in fact, high quality and interaction, learning from your colleagues and connecting with your colleagues.
So content and connecting with people. So what did you actually put in place, Armand?
Well, I'm very happy that we have now 60 hours, well, I must say even 90 hours of video on demand. We have 7 live channels with daily interviews and comments and advices, and meet the expert sessions. And there is for the participants really the possibility to interact with the expert of their choice. There will be on the live channels the Next Lounge and the Tech Forum. And we've created also a separate channel for the nurses and the allied healthcare professionals. Opinions and comments from our former presidents will also be given. We have a daily preview of the program, daily breaking news, and of course the social media are also very active to keep you updated about what happens during the Congress.
So this is like a real full network with a lot of rich content. I believe you've also made a quiz. Tell us about that.
Yes, we made a quiz indeed. And this is a quiz where you will be asked questions every day, which will guide you a little bit through the program of the Congress. You will find the answers in the program itself. And if you do very well, you can win a free entrance for the Congress next year.
Ah, great prize. Can you give us some figures maybe concerning the Congress, Armand?
Yes, of course. We have 320 speakers from the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine, and we have 47 industry speakers, and we have already 6,000 delegates. And we have paid attention to gender parity and diversity, and I'm very happy that since my mandate we have increased the percentage of female speakers with 50%. But it's good to know that people are not asked because they are male or female, they are asked because they are good speakers. And what we did especially is to use other networks as well. So I think this really helps us to have a sparkling Congress. There were over 1,200 submitted abstracts, and we accepted just over 1,100. And the 30 best abstracts will be presented in a session that is called 30 Best Oral Presentations. Apart from that, we have the Research Awards, and we have 10 ICM Research Awards, and despite the difficult times, we were able to have these Research Awards with a figure of €220,000. So I think that is really a fantastic achievement for our society.
Yes.
It's of course that I have to thank the Congress Committee who has worked very hard on this together in these difficult times. And it is of note that we were able to organize also the Eurasia Congress with our Asian friends in September. And we also had the Life Physiology Congress in January when life was still quite normal in Europe. It was in Prague. And I would like to ask everybody, do participate in this using the hashtag Lives2020. And I would also say that if you have any suggestion on the Congress, how we can improve it or what we can do better next year, do send your suggestions to me. And I would like to thank everybody for attending this Congress, and I will hope you will have a fantastic time. And next year it will be in Copenhagen. I really hope that it will be really in Copenhagen, that we are there.
Yeah.
We will take some of the ideas and inventions that we made for this year. We will surely take them with us next year also in Copenhagen. Thank you again very much, and see you in Copenhagen there as well next year.
Quite moving, actually. You're almost in a trance there with that music, weren't we?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah,
we
it's
always
great.
try to give goosebumps.
Yeah, I had goosebumps there, I did. So let's get down to business with some content, Arno.
Yes, absolutely. Well, if you remember, well, many of you will remember we had last year a special presentation about the importance of body language, which is a very important part of our communication. And since it was last year body language, now we will now switch to language. In our intensive care society, we speak English, and for most of us, it's not our mother tongue. It's not my mother tongue. So the language is very important. And what does it make a difference if you speak another language, or that you speak a language anyway? And so we asked Lera Boroditsky, who is a professor in the field of cognitive science in San Diego, and she does research on the relationship of mind, the world, and language, to talk about the role of language. And it's a very big pleasure to introduce her. And I would say, Lera, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Armand, so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me here. Thank you for the critical work that you do, especially in such a challenging time. I'll be talking about how the languages we speak shape the ways we think. Almost all of you work in a rich multilingual environment. Most of you speak more than one language. And of course, there's more than just European languages in the world. There are about 7,000 languages spoken around the world, and each language differs from the next in all kinds of ways, in their sounds and the words that they use, and also in their structures. Now, this has led people to wonder for thousands of years, do the languages we speak shape the way we think? Do speakers of different languages see the world in the same ways or in different ways because of the structure of their language? Well, people have been offering opinions on this for a long time. So, for example, Charlemagne said, to have a second language is to have a second soul. One of his successors, Charles V, said, a man who knows 4 languages is worth 4 men. Something to maybe bring up with your boss if you're multilingual. Say, I should be paid 4 times as much. Frederick the Great of Prussia had a more specific set of hypotheses. He said, I speak English to my accountants, French to my ambassadors, Italian to my mistress, Latin to my God, and German to my horse. Not clear why he had this specific set of hypotheses, but we've all heard this kind of thing before. This language is great for romance. This other language is great for reasoning or war argument. None of those broad claims that people make is backed up by any kind of empirical evidence. But what I will tell you today is evidence of how specific features in language lead people to think in particular patterns. Now, we aren't always intuitively convinced that language influences. For example, Shakespeare has Juliet say, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. And intuitively, that also seems like it might be right. Of course, a rose should smell as sweet, regardless of what you call it. That actually turns out not to be true. People have done research on this, and a rose doesn't smell as sweet if you give it to people in a paper bag and say it's grass. They don't think it's as pleasant. So Shakespeare turns out to be empirically wrong on that count. Let me give you a couple of my favorite examples of how thinking about even very basic domains differs across languages. I'll start with the notion of time. Of course, time is a critical feature in your work. Time is also the most frequent noun in English. We seem to be obsessed with time. And the way people think about time differs from place to place. For example, in a lot of European languages that are written from left to right, people will mentally lay out time from left to right, and the way we'll read all kinds of visual patterns will go from left to right. So in this little Nestle logo for a nutritional supplement for kids, it's really easy to read it and say, okay, this is a product that helps my kid get stronger and walk. When they started marketing this in Arabic-speaking countries, Arabic is written from right to left, well, they ran into a problem because if you read this logo from right to left, it becomes quite puzzling what this product would do for your child. So depending on how your language is written, just this basic fact, mentally you will lay out time in different directions. People also differ in whether they think of the future as in front of them or the future behind them. So we like to think in a lot of European languages that the future is ahead. We say the best is ahead of us, the worst is behind us. But in some languages, it's exactly the opposite. So for the Aymara, for example, this is a group that lives in Bolivia, they put the past in front and the future behind. And they do that because they say, well, the past is known, it's manifest, that's why you can see it, it's in front of your eyes. Whereas the past, the future, it's unknown, that's why you can't see it, it's behind your head. In some languages, people don't lay out time with respect to their body at all. So this is an Aboriginal group in Australia I had a chance to work with. Instead of using words like left and right to organize space, they use words like north, south, east, and west. So the way you say hello in Cook Tyler is you say, which way are you going? And the answer should be something like north, northwest in the far distance. How about you? In some languages like this, even the way you talk about body parts uses cardinal direction terms. So in some languages, you would say, oh, there's an ant on your southwest leg. Or imagine you're giving operating instructions to someone. You would say, operate on a northwest leg. Of course, you have to make sure it's the right leg then. Now, people who speak languages like this stay oriented remarkably well. They have to just be able to speak their language properly. And it turns out it affects not just how they organize space, but also how they organize time. Let me give you an example. I took these pictures to the Cook Tower. They're pictures of my grandfather at different ages, and I would put them in a stack, give them to someone and say, hey, can you just lay these out in the correct order? And the way I've put them here is the way an English speaker might lay them out from left to right. Well, that's not what the Cook Tower did. If they were happened to be sitting facing south, they would lay them out from left to right. If they happened to be sitting facing north, they would lay them out from right to left. If they happened to be sitting facing east, they would make the cards come towards them. What's the pattern there? The pattern is from east to west, the sun. So for them, time doesn't flow relative to the body from left to right the way it does for us. So for me, time goes in this direction if I'm facing this way, but if I turn, it flows this way. If I turn this way, it flows this way. Very egocentric of me to make the dimension of time chase me around every time I turn my body. For the Cook Tower, time flows along the landscape from east to west. Languages also differ in how they break up the color spectrum. So there's a continuous color spectrum. Some languages have lots of words for colors, some have only a handful. And where languages put boundaries between colors differs. Let me just give you a brief example from Russian, my native language. So in Russian, there isn't a single word for blue that covers the entire spectrum of hues that English calls blue. Instead, there's one category, голубой, which is for light blues, and another category, синий, which is for dark blues. And so Russian speakers have a lifetime of experience of calling these shades of blue by different names. And in fact, it turns out that Russian speakers are faster to make distinctions across this color boundary. Their brains respond with more surprise as you shift from one type of blue to another because they're treating it as categorically different. This is a very low level effect of language. Even at the earliest stages of processing, it's very simple how you process colors changes. Languages, of course, have other structures. So, for example, lots of European languages have grammatical gender, where all nouns might be feminine or masculine. So these genders differ then across languages. For example, the word for the sun is feminine in German, but it's masculine in Spanish. The word for the moon is exactly the opposite. Does this make a difference for how German speakers and Spanish speakers actually think of the sun and the moon? Do German speakers see the sun as somehow being more female-like and the moon as being more male-like, and the reverse for Spanish speakers? Well, it turns out that is, in fact, the case. So if you ask people to give adjectives to describe inanimate objects, like give me some adjectives to describe a bridge or a key. If it's feminine in your language, you might say bridges are beautiful or elegant. If it's masculine in your language, you might be more likely to say they're strong or towering, these stereotypically feminine or masculine terms. And this extends even to artifacts that we create. So for example, if you go to an art gallery and look at a sculpture where an artist has tried to sculpt justice or peace or time, the gender of the body representing justice or peace or time is very highly predicted by the grammatical gender in the artist's native language, right? So if it's grammatically feminine, this little quirk of grammar then gets reflected literally in stone, gets carved in stone. Languages also differ in how they describe events, sometimes around important things that affect our sense of personal responsibility, liability, blame. So, for example, if you observe an accident like this, if you let people watch someone accidentally breaking a vase, if you describe it using direct agentive language, you say, he broke the vase, people are likely to blame the person more, and they're also likely to ask for more in damages, right? Say the person is more liable for the damage, as opposed to if you say the vase broke or the vase broke itself, it so happened to him that the vase broke. And languages also differ in how they tend to describe accidental events, and as a result, speakers of those languages remember the events differently, remember different things about the events, depending on what is emphasized in their language. Now, I've given you a few examples of how thinking can differ across languages. I've given you one example where there are big differences in how people lay out time, right? So it can go in completely opposite directions. I also gave you an example of where language can have a really early effect on cognition, where even something as basic as telling apart two shades of blue is influenced by what kinds of words are required in your language. I gave you an example of language being able to have a broad effect. So grammatical gender, it may seem a little silly, but it's required on all nouns. And what that means is language is affecting how you think about anything that can be named by a noun. Anything that can be named by a noun, that's a lot of stuff, right? That's a really broad effect. And language can also play a role in these very weighty decisions we make about blame, about responsibility, about financial liability. Okay. In addition to all of these, language also has emotional impacts. And maybe particularly important in your context is that when people are speaking in a second language, even if they're very fluent, that second language is not as emotionally connected as their first language. For example, people report that swearing is not as taboo to them in their second language as in their first language because those initial childhood emotional connections that you form with swearing and being told not to swear, they're not as strong in the second language. Now, the consequence of that is that the emotional impact of subtle differences in phrasing can be lost in the second language. And you might say something in a second language that comes across as rude or cold or abrupt that to you just sounds factual, but to someone for whom those emotional connections are alive because it's their first language could sound really striking. Okay. So I want to start to end by a simple suggestion for improving communication. I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw. He says, "The single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." We've all had this experience where you say, "But I clearly said blah, blah, blah," and the person just doesn't hear the thing that you said, right? Or what they heard is so different from what you think you said. And let me give you a way of thinking about why communication, especially from an expert to someone who's not an expert, can be so complicated. Let me read to you this paragraph, and you probably will not understand what it's about. So let me try. The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups depending on their makeup. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that is the next step. Otherwise, you're pretty well set. It's better to do too few things at once than too many. Remember, mistakes can be expensive. At first, the whole procedure will seem quite complicated. Soon, however, it will become just another fact of life. Now, I think for most of you, that will have made no sense. You don't have a mental image of what's going on, what the instructions are telling you. Suppose I tell you this is about doing the laundry. Now let's read it again. The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups depending on their makeup. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that is the next step, and so on, right? So all of a sudden, all of these words, these are all normal English words that you were familiar with before, but now they're starting to take on a real life, and you're starting to really understand the paragraph because it's connected to something that you already know, which is about doing the laundry. And quite often when we as experts communicate to people who are not experts, we've said things in a way that we think is very, very clear. There's nothing technically unclear in this paragraph. And yet, unless you're able to connect it to something that your audience already knows, they won't be able to get anything out of it. Okay, so I've given you a bunch of examples of how language can very importantly, deeply, broadly shape the way we think. Let me end on a lighter note. Sometimes language seems ineffective. So for example, the US Congress renamed French fries into freedom fries a few years ago. That didn't have any effect. This is not the first time that the US has done this. It used to be during World War I, everything with a German name got renamed into Liberty something or other. These substitutions don't work because they're logically flawed. So if we have freedom fries and freedom toast and freedom poodles and freedom kissing and freedom manicures, then what should we call France? Freedom land? And what should we call French? The language of freedom? The substitution starts by trying to say that France is somehow antithetical to freedom, but in fact, the way language works, it makes them synonymous. Right? So I suggest, silly suggestion, that if the Americans really want to annoy the French, and we understand how language and cognition interact, then take things that the French dislike and call them French. So ketchup will become French sauce, McDonald's will be the French cafe, monogamy will be the French relationship, Disneyland will be France, Americans will be French people, the English language will be called French, and so on. Thank you so much, and thank you again for the critical work that you do.
So thank you so much to Lira Boroditsky for this very exciting and interesting content. Let's get back to our main topic now that hosted the news all around the world, of course, during the past year, COVID-19. Let's go behind the scenes to see how different hospitals handled the pandemic worldwide. And let's first head to South Africa to see Mervyn Meyer. Mervyn is with us. You are the principal specialist at the Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital. First of all, Mervyn, what happened in your IC unit during COVID? Tell us.
Thank you very much. And before beginning, I'd just like to pay humble and very significant homage and tribute to all the absolutely courageous heroes and healthcare workers around the globe. I think everyone has done an absolutely remarkable job. But in South Africa, which is a resource-limited country, a low-middle income class country, we soon recognized that, in fact, unless we really prepared adequately, we may very well end up being in big trouble in terms of how to deal with the problem. So preparation was absolutely paramount, and we had 3 or 4 months of time versus elsewhere in the world to prepare adequately. And one of the things that we recognized bearing in mind we only have around about 35 to 45 functional practicing intensive care specialists in the whole country, for a country of 60 million people, was that COVID, despite the challenge, also brings opportunity. And I think that was a very important issue. And so within very little time, following the preparation and appropriate communication, we recognized we had to expand our existing facilities, not necessarily to create field hospitals, but to maximize what we had in-house. And so within 6 weeks in my own hospital, which was designated a major COVID referral center, we in fact had more than doubled, effectively trebled our ICU capacity. We hired staff, we started nursing upskill programs, and to cut a long story short, we were able to manage where at one point in time, we were the 4th or 5th most afflicted country in the world, everything that we in fact had. It was not easy. And in fact, one of the things that I have to emphasize is that being poor doesn't mean poor care. In fact, excellent and sound practice with good quality care is possible. And what we aimed to do was maximize the simplicity and the principles of care so that we could get things correct most of the time. And in fact, many of the outcomes were very, very favorable. At the outset, we didn't have what everyone else had, ventilators and high-flow nasal oxygen devices, but we maximized, we utilized, and in fact, we improvised with creativity and innovation, and eventually many of those entities prevailed, and we were actually able to confer what I believe was really excellent care in the face of potential adversity, and we've always endeavored and aimed and aspired for excellence with passion and with purpose, and it comes with a spirit that can only be recognized in a developing country and in a continent such as which I practice in Africa, where we went about things with the spirit of Ubuntu, which means to actually go about and practice care with compassion and with humane elements associated with it. So at the present moment, we in fact have an expanded facility. We've probably advanced intensive care 10 to 20 years ahead of where the wheel would have turned, with the recognition that in fact we had to do that. And so as our surge has decreased a little and we're waiting for our second surge, we're in the midst of summer at the present moment and numbers are starting to build up again. In my own hospital at a point in time, just to share the elements, we had packed ICU, 250 to 500 patients within the hospital. South Africa, in fact, has had around about 21,500 deaths and about 800,000 individuals who've been affected, which is probably a gross underestimate because we don't have the same testing capacity. But we were 4th or the 5th most afflicted country in the world at one point in time. But I think the important legacy that will be left is that we've been able to maximize, expand services, start nursing upskill programs, bring intensive care to the fore, because it would not have been possible without intensive care. And I can tell you right now as we speak, hundreds, if not thousands of non-COVID lives have been saved because we've had expanded facilities where patients would not necessarily have had the option of intensive care therapy or even the option of going to an intensive care unit. And so maternal mortalities have been obviated. Big cancer surgery has been allowed to actually happen. Trauma has been dealt with, and many other complex medical cases where individuals would not necessarily have had the possibility. And very lastly, just to share what we did do in a simple fashion, because if you do the simple things well, most of the time you will have a successful outcome. What we were able to do, and we're just busy analyzing some of that data, where after all this preparation, appropriate communication, sorting out our own PPE issues, we were actually able to, I think, deliver care of excellence in a simplistic fashion, doing all the correct things. I'd like to believe in the correct way. There's only one way to do things. That's the correct way. And in fact, the outcomes in many instances look as good, if not better, than many of our first world counterparts. So I believe it is feasible, it is possible to achieve that excellence, even in the face of adversity. And once again, just to reiterate, being poor doesn't mean poor care. You can strive for excellence in the context of things. And once again, the enthusiasm, the passion, and the way that people went about things has just been absolutely remarkable. We're waiting for our second surge. I've just come down from the ICU now, and in fact, the numbers are increasing, but not nearly at the same degree that is happening in Europe and perhaps elsewhere in the world. But that may well happen come the next month or two. But I think we're in a far better position than where we were right at the outset. And I think, as I mentioned, perhaps the most important element that's come out of this is that opportunity has been taken in the face of real adversity. So nothing, to finish off with, nothing is impossible. I like to turn it around. Impossible is sometimes nothing. Leave you with that.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. Thank you very much for giving us some of your precious time. It's been really great to hear from you today. Let's head to the USA now to hear from Heatherly Bailey, emergency medicine intensivist at the Durham VA Medical Center. Heatherly, good to see you. How did COVID transform your emergency department? Tell us.
Well, thank you for the invitation to attend, and I would agree. I'd like to express, just like Mervyn did, my admiration for our colleagues around the world in both critical care, emergency medicine, pre-hospital, and the scientists that are working so hard to bring us a vaccine so that we can hopefully bring this pandemic to a closure. It's been challenging, just like everyone else. We had some forewarning, thanks to Maurizio and his information from Italy, that we were able to prepare our hospital. But what we quickly realized in the beginning of March was that we didn't have enough supplies. Our PPE was limited, so we had to restrict the number of masks. You were limited to 1 mask a day. The gowns or disposable gowns were in very short supply, so we have limited disposable gowns to aerosolizing procedures. And we have these laundered gowns that our laundry is doing a phenomenal job in turning over hundreds of gowns every day to refill our supply. We had only a handful of negative pressure rooms in our ICUs and in the emergency department, and so they were able to procure portable HEPA filters. And they have been brought down into the room so that if there is a COVID patient, they're in the hallways, they're in the rooms. And so we've managed, and we did have a little bit of a lull in my area during the summer, but unfortunately, as you've probably heard, the United States has been leading this pandemic unfortunately in the numbers and in deaths. And our numbers in the country have been increasing every day for the last, I think we're on the 18th or 19th day of steady increasing. And we've actually had more than 1 million patients in the last, people ill in the last 6 days. And one of the challenges we're facing now is that we've had so many staff that have contracted COVID, both from in work and in their daily lives. You know, just going to the grocery store, as you know, is not a safe thing, even though you're masked and doing your best to stay safe. So one of our big challenges right now is staffing, making sure that we have adequate people to care for our critically ill patients. We've had to close sections and we've all had to work harder. I just worked last night and I left several hours later than I was supposed to, just because of the need for help in the system. But I think that we as a team have come together. We really try and watch out for each other. If we see that someone is a little bit tired and maybe is not appropriately donned and doffed, we watch out to make sure, especially our house staff that change out a lot, they really I think have been a bit challenged with both their education, because it's been so different. But I think that our level of care has increased, as Mervyn has said, and I think that we are all grateful that we see a potential end with the vaccines that will hopefully make a difference and allow us to be able to go back to some semblance of normal, but maintaining a vigilance. So thank you for the time.
And thank you for your witnessing today. Thank you very much for being with us, Heatherly. Let's now move to South America, to Argentina, to see Elisa Estensoro, Director of the Medical Intensive Care Unit at the Hospital Interzonal General de Agudas, General San Martin de la Planta in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I think all the Argentinians that are watching us are laughing at me with my accent, but Elisa, we're really thrilled to have you with us today. Thanks for being here. What does your working environment look like these days, Elisa?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. But I must say that really we had an advantage in time because we were able to see what happened, to witness what happened in Europe and different parts of the world because before the pandemic came to Latin America, Argentina in particular. So we had a lot of time to prepare. Think of this, in March the 20th, lockdown was established. And during that time span, the government in general acquired lots of equipment, ventilators, monitors, personal equipment, and also many health personnel entered into the system, especially into the ICU. But the problem was that there were no many intensivists. We have new nurses, new therapists, but not intensivists because, as you know, well, this specialty is not chosen by young doctors, and especially in Latin America, in which the wages are so low. So it was quite a problem. But really, during the months of March, April, and May, in our hospital, there was big preparation, educational activities, and also the ICU became the center of learning activities for the rest of the hospital. But what happened in Argentina with this very early lockdown was that the cases really didn't seem to arrive. Really the peak of cases, we had it at last in the third week of September. So during all the time we are preparing for a battle that never arrived, never seemed to arrive, until finally, during the last month of August, the cases started to rise. And of course, we were not overwhelmed, luckily. We were highly stressed. And what happened to the personnel was we were really committed and focused on this, but they began falling sick. And really, we did not have many replacements for them. So we had what we had, and the work really doubled, not only because of the doubling of the number of beds, but also because we had to replace those who came down with the disease. And in Argentina, there was another particular that also happened in Colombia, that we had no peak of cases. We had a very long-standing plateau of cases, and that really produced people got tired and discontent. And also the same happened in the society because a lockdown was established in March, but really after that it was relaxed and people were pushed from a releasing of activities. And when we came the peak of cases in September, the highest part of the plateau, really society was tired and didn't want to hear anything about being in lockdown again, or just they were pushing for new activities, So we have this feeling of an extreme work and stress in the ICU with very sick patients. I know most of them being prone and with all the work that entails, and the society that was looking to something completely different. So, there were different times. As I told you, many got sick, but really they're all with us, at least in our hospital. And now cases began to decrease. We are in 50% of cases in our COVID unit, and really this is diminishing. And we are looking forward to the summer, But we are still with 8,000 cases in Argentina per day. So it's still a number which should be decreased. because we are entering the summer, and while people now are in the streets, they are not taking precautions. We are not seeing isolation or distance anymore, unfortunately. So we are afraid what can happen during the next autumn. But there's great expectations about vaccination here. So we hope that maybe the second wave will not be so, I would say, intense and deadly as the first.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It was wonderful to have you. Let's move on now to Asia to see Kent Doi in Japan. You are a professor at the University of Tokyo, Kent. You are also one of the executive directors of JSICM. Tell us what happened in your IC unit.
Thank you very much for inviting me this very nice conference. And right now, we Japanese are facing the third wave of the COVID-19. In the first wave, we took care of the relatively younger patient. And in the second wave, many patients who is around 20 years old or so, very young patient, became positive for COVID-19. But at that time, we don't have so many severely ill patients. But right now, in the third wave, many old-aged patients were becoming positive for new coronavirus and needed for intensive care in my ICU also. So currently, around 20,000 of the Japanese patients were treated in Japanese hospital, and 400 or 500 patients required intensive care in ICU. So what I want to say is the patient background is being changed from the first wave to the third wave. So in the first and second wave, we didn't have to worry about so much about the capacity of our ICU. However, right now we are so much worried about our ICU capacity, not only for the space but also the number of the medical staff. So unfortunately, we don't have so many intensivists here in Japan, and the intensivist is not so popular subspecialty. So that's our very big problem. So we need to think about it, and we need to, expand our educational program and to increase the number of the medical staff who can handle with mechanical ventilation and maybe the treatment with ECMO. That's our current situation in Japan.
Thank you so much for being with us, Kent Doi. Do you have any comments, guys, on the set from what you've heard from this world tour of the different hospitals and our friends that have been kindly with us today?
Well, I think one of the important things we hear from them is what we have also experienced, the unexpectedness, the surprise, and big numbers of patients coming suddenly. I think that aspect is very recognizable, and Mervyn has indicated very well the situation in low and middle income countries, but actually what I wanted to add to that is that in this COVID-19 crisis there are no rich countries, because all the rich countries, so-called, we all felt the lack of facilities, the lack of beds, the lack of personnel, the lack of equipment and materials. So that, I mean, it's not a good way of uniting each other, but this has, in one way, is quite uniform for us all, which we have experienced.
Yeah, and I agree. Thanks for sharing your experience. And it's also the key message, I think, is everywhere in the world. It's not about space and technology. It's medical personnel is clearly our biggest resource, and it's not so easy to find them in a short period of time. So I agree. We hope in vaccines and what the citizens can do to keep the contagion down.
you'd like to say a word on
Yeah,
it?
yes, what I like very much is we hear many similarities between the countries. I was a little bit amazed also by what Mervyn told, that the non-COVID care was better possible than before the COVID crisis. And I think you are probably much better in improvising than we were in the so-called rich countries. So that was perhaps an advantage. But I also want to emphasize the enormous stress it gave on the personnel. As Hadley said, that some of your colleagues get ill. We ourselves, we had also in our unit, there was one of our previous nurses got really very ill and even died because of COVID. And this has, of course, a very big impact on your colleagues in your unit. And the big difference for me was as a crisis that you have a crisis in the hospital and where you work, and that is part of our normal work. But then you go home and then the crisis just goes on. And I compared it to that you hear all the time the sound of the Jaws movie, you know, you're sitting there and it's always a threatening sound going through your head. And I was very interesting to hear your experience about it in the different countries and continents.
Thank you so much to all of you for this world tour of your different ICUs. We're now going to be spending 20 minutes with two authors of two major studies. First, let's connect with Kenneth Bailey, Senior Clinical Research Fellow at the Roslin Institute, University of Edinburgh. Also, he works at the Intensive Care Unit at the Royal Infirmary, Edinburgh. Kenneth, it's over to you to tell us about your important study that you performed during COVID. Here we go.
Well, thank you very much indeed. So it's a privilege to report some of the results from the recovery trial on behalf of the Recovery Trial Steering Committee. I'm very honoured to be a member of that group. The trial is led by Peter Horby and Martin Landry at the University of Oxford. I'm going to tell you about some of the key findings from the trial so far. Just going back to the very beginning of the outbreak, at least from our perspective in the UK, we were watching this happen from the very beginning of January. The scale of the outbreak was growing, and Peter Horby, who leads the recovery trial, had actually conducted 2 clinical trials in China in advance of the first wave hitting the UK. And at the beginning of the outbreak, that's of course where we thought we were going to make the therapeutic discoveries, because that's where the patients were. When it became clear that the outbreak was going to hit the UK, we got together and planned a study, and initially it took a protocol from one of Peter's trials in China, and the plan was to try to prevent critical illness. So I work in an intensive care unit. Of course, I'm interested in finding ways to treat critical illness, but it was very clear that there was a high risk that intensive care units would be overwhelmed here as they had been elsewhere. And so at a national level, the priority was to find treatments that would improve outcomes, but specifically prevent critical care services being overwhelmed. And so we conducted a clinical trial of therapeutic interventions in hospitalized patients, so at the point of presentation to hospital. Now, setting up the trial in an outbreak means that it has to be pragmatic and adaptable. So the design of the study is open label. We're not able to provide placebos and all that extra complexity that goes with it. And adaptive in the sense that additional arms can be added and arms can be removed when therapies are shown either to be effective or futile. And that's very important because as we've already seen in this outbreak, the discoveries can come quickly and practice is changing before our eyes. So the study has adapted. The study began with the first 4 interventions. A couple of them were added in the first 2 weeks, but essentially the first 4 interventions were there at the beginning. And then additional interventions have been added since. I'm going to focus on the components of the trial for which we have results. Specifically, we have shown that there's no evidence of benefit from hydroxychloroquine or from lopinavir and ritonavir. Very shortly after the beginning of the study, we showed a very strong treatment effect for dexamethasone. And of course, that's where most of the interest in this study lies. The other discoveries are important because they prevent patients coming to harm from receiving these other therapies. But the real excitement, of course, is in a treatment that's effective, which is, for us in critical care medicine, a very striking effect size. The setup of the study was extremely fast. The steering committee came together on the telephone on the 10th of March of 2020. By the 13th of March, the first draft of the protocol was circulated, and the first patient was recruited 10 days later on the 23rd of March. The first results had an impact on the trial on the 8th of June, and that showed the treatment effect from dexamethasone, which is what I'm going to focus on. Now, dexamethasone, of course, is a corticosteroid, and there's a long history of treatment with corticosteroids and infectious diseases in critical care medicine, which haven't shown very convincing effects. There were very strong theoretical reasons for thinking that targeted immunosuppression would be effective in influenza, as this article describes in 2013, and more broadly in critical illness and infectious diseases. This article from 2014 describes how we might be able to find specific targets to modulate the host response to alter outcome in critical illness. But there were many reasons to be concerned about the risks of corticosteroid therapy as well. So at the start of the outbreak, we reviewed the evidence and published this report describing a narrative review of clinical evidence for corticosteroids in SARS and MERS. And we found that there was a real chance of harm. So we had genuine equipoise on this. We thought logically it should work based on our understanding of the pathophysiology, but there were risks, and particularly evidence from both SARS and MERS that viral shedding is prolonged in patients on corticosteroid therapy. So clearly in an infectious disease, the first place you look for the cause of the problem is the pathogen. So any treatment that prolongs shedding of the pathogen is a risk. So we concluded that clinical trials were necessary and pushed hard to conduct them. And then, of course, in March, we initiated one with Peter Martin and Wei Shen Lim, who already had a protocol written for a clinical trial of steroids in influenza that was ready to go. So this report is the first full report of the finding relating to dexamethasone. We reported it in medRxiv about 4 weeks after finding the result. Sorry, I said 4 weeks. I mean 2 weeks after finding the result, and we submitted it, of course, for publication. But I think most people changed their practice based on the medRxiv report, which really shows the power of pre-publication. In the UK, most doctors found out about the result from this press conference. That's Peter Horby on the right, standing next to the Prime Minister, reporting the effect of dexamethasone. And I think because so many hospitals in the UK were already recruiting to recovery, the trial recruited almost across the entire United Kingdom, people were familiar with the trial, and so practice changed literally overnight. So here are the results. This is the overall result for dexamethasone, a Kaplan-Meier curve showing a decrease in mortality overall in patients treated with dexamethasone, with, as you can see here, a convincing p-value. That's the primary endpoint, 28-day mortality, and the primary analysis. Now, we did specify a priori in the statistical analysis plan subgroups that we would consider, and the most interesting one from the critical care perspective is, of course, the relatively small group of patients on invasive mechanical ventilation, so about 1,000 patients. And in that group, you can see there was a very striking benefit from treatment with dexamethasone. That is far beyond what we had expected, and of course much greater than the effect sizes we've seen from other studies of steroids in critical care. And I think the obvious conclusion is that the fact that these patients had a single diagnosis and relatively homogeneous pathophysiology is the explanation for why we've seen such a strong effect size from a single therapy. This is the effect in the group of patients who are hospitalized but were on oxygen only. Again, the dexamethasone mortality curve is lower, indicating benefit from dexamethasone. But interestingly, in the group of patients who were admitted to hospital but did not require oxygen, there was a trend that the confidence interval doesn't cross 1, so it's not statistically significant, but there was a trend towards higher mortality in that group. This forest plot shows the important result, the primary endpoint, and the composite analysis of all participants at the bottom. So that's the foundation of everything. That's why we know the treatment works. But we also looked at the other a priori defined subgroups. And there are some interesting signals here. The specific one that I would like to draw your attention to is time from symptom onset. So patients who reported having been ill for more than 7 days at the time of randomization were more likely to benefit from treatment with dexamethasone. So the treatment works in severe disease, severe respiratory disease, and disease that's been present for more than 7 days, and that's consistent with the growing paradigm of COVID-19, where there's an initial phase of illness with high viral load, followed by a second inflammatory phase in the second week of illness. This plot just shows the key severity subgroups again. So the group with invasive mechanical ventilation, in whom there's an extremely striking benefit, and the group who did not receive oxygen. I think it's worth reflecting, just looking closely at this plot, that there is an element of good fortune in this result, because of course we all believe that dexamethasone is effective because of this primary result that shows that the overall treatment effect is strongly towards benefit and strongly significant. In the guidelines now, patients in these two subgroups receive the treatment with dexamethasone. But if the effect had only been present in a subgroup, I think it would have been much harder to convince ourselves and others that the effect was real. Now, this subgroup effect, the trend is statistically significant. A chi-squared test across all 3 categories does reveal a significant evidence of heterogeneity. But during the outbreak, there was probably a change in the admission pattern in hospitals in the UK. And the size of this group who didn't receive oxygen compared to this group who received invasive mechanical ventilation is the determinant of where that final result ends up. So that if we were to increase the size in imaginary data, these are not real data, of course, but if we were to increase the size of the no oxygen received group just by admitting more patients to hospital who don't need oxygen, then the overall effect in the study would have been a null, even though the therapy is clearly effective in patients who do require oxygen. It is interesting to consider where we might go from here, and so I'd like to finish by telling you about some more evidence that we've just reported that finds multiple genetic associations with severe illness, critical illness in COVID-19. The fundamental challenge in modulating the immune response is identifying specific targets that will prevent inflammation but not impair the host response to the infection. And several of these genetic hits, including this one, tyrosine kinase 2, lead us directly to therapeutic targets that might do that. Tyrosine kinase 2 is inhibited by a class of drugs called JAK inhibitors, including baricitinib, which has already been proposed as an intervention for COVID-19. I'm going to stop there, but I must acknowledge, firstly, of course, Peter Horby and Martin Landry, who led this work, the extensive group of people across the whole United Kingdom who worked extremely hard to deliver it, and of course the patients and their relatives who participated in the study. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks to you, Kenneth, and please stay with us because we'll be back to you in a few minutes for some questions. Right after hearing a fellow colleague of yours, a researcher, his name is John Beigel. He's the Associate Director for Clinical Research at the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. John, it's over to you to tell us more about your study, please.
Well, first, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to present. Just for background, I actually am trained in infectious disease and critical care. Most of my research is infectious disease, but my clinical practice is mainly critical care. So I'm to talk about remdesivir for COVID-19 today, and just no disclosures. I work for the U.S. government. So there are 4 primary clinical trials in COVID-19 that are randomized and give some insight into remdesivir. So the first was, this is a list of all 4. The first was Wang, which was out of China. That was a small study. They stopped after 237 subjects, stopped because they had no new cases. So they had the time to clinical improvement with a hazard ratio in the right direction, but they stopped premature of their planned sample size. Then our study, and I'm going to talk our study in more detail. The Spinner study was a Gilead-sponsored study, which was open label design, standard of care 5 or 10 days. The 5 days showed some benefit, 10 days did not, but they had the open label design really influenced the time to discharge, their primary endpoint. So the ones I'm going to focus, and then there's PAN, which is the solidarity study. That's just in preprint only. So the ones I'm going to focus on are mainly the ACT study, which is our study, and contrast it to solidarity. So for ACT study, it is a study of hospitalized adults with SARS-CoV-2 by PCR with evidence of lower respiratory tract disease, and they're randomized 1-to-1 to receive remdesivir or placebo. That continues for 10 days or until they are discharged. This is the ordinal scale we had set up. And this is the population enrolled. So any of those 4 categories, hospitalized, anywhere from not requiring oxygen all the way to mechanical ventilation or ECMO. And then to get to recover, the primary endpoint, they had to get to one of these top 3 categories, either not hospitalized or hospitalized, but not needing to be hospitalized, and hospitalized mainly for infection control issues, no longer having any medical care. So the way this is set up, obviously those in ordinal 7 had the biggest jump to get to the recovered status. So this was our primary analysis. It is the time to recovery, time to one of those top 3 categories for the entire population, 15 days in the placebo arm, down to 10 days in remdesivir, a recovery rate ratio 1.29 and p-value of less than 0.001. This is broken down by ordinal score. So on the left, you see what we just discussed, the recovery rate ratio of 1.29, and then ordinal 4, not on oxygen, 5 on low flow, oxygen, 6 on high flow or 9 invasives, and 7 mechanical ventilation. And you see the biggest benefit in those ordinal 4 and 5, some in 6, and basically nothing in 7. If you look in 7, the study was a 28-day study or 29-day study, and the time to recovery, the median was the end of the study in ordinal 7. So I think the way this was set up, knowing what we know, it was set up in a way that they couldn't have got to recovered. We didn't anticipate a 4-week time to get them to a recovered status. This was our pre-specified key secondary endpoint, which is ordinal score on day 15. So this basically says, regardless of where you came in, what is the odds that you're improved? The odds ratio, overall 1.5, and a p-value again less than 0.001. And here again, you see the biggest benefit in ordinal 5, 4 and 5, some in 6, less in 7. The nice thing about this is you don't need to get to that recovered status, just movement up in that ordinal scale that matters. This is mortality. So we knew ahead of time we weren't powered for mortality. We had a mortality rate ratio of 0.73, 15% mortality down to 11%. The biggest benefit to mortality is again in that ordinal 4 and 5, and doesn't seem to have any benefit in 6 and 7, but the p-value of 0.07, so I don't think we can say anything about the mortality in our study. This is secondary outcomes. So we collect a lot of information. We collect information daily and on secondary outcomes, so we can understand the breadth of the benefits of these drugs. If you look, there are less days on oxygen, less new use of oxygen. So those that came in and not requiring oxygen, how many required oxygen at any point in the study? Less new use of non-invasive, less days on mechanical ventilation, less new use of mechanical ventilation. These are more secondary endpoints. So time to 1 step, time to 2 steps, all benefit the remdesivir arm. So the way I would wrap up the Act 1 is remdesivir improves outcomes, time to recovery, and ordinal score on day 15. The multiple secondary outcomes are also supportive of that same effect. Mortality was lower, but we didn't show it. We weren't big enough, we didn't show it. So in contrast, I want to talk about the Solidarity Study. So Solidarity Study is a trial on hospitalized COVID-19 repurposed for antiviral treatments. This was done in 405 hospitals in 30 countries. 2,700 people were given remdesivir, 4,000 common control, of which around 2,700 were used for comparison. So in this study, and this is again only available in preprint right now, but hopefully will be published in the next week or two, that the recovery rate ratio, the mortality ratio for this 0.95, with 300 deaths in about each arm. So no benefit in mortality. So what are the issues with the Solidarity Study? So the Solidarity Study was not a placebo-controlled study. It does add complexity. I agree with the prior statement, but it is also helpful to avoid any treatment assessment biases. It does, Solidarity did not require, or at least it did not specify how they required confirmation of infection. In fact, it suggested that a confirmation was not required. There was no on-site data monitoring. Again, we put a lot of effort into seeing the source data at the site so that we actually understand the data and can attest to its validity and its accuracy. There's no recording of timing of symptoms before treatment, so it's really hard to know how these two arms are and where they're at in that course of disease. Patients were required to stay in the hospital for 10 days. We know from the Spinner study that this prolonged hospital stay biases against the drug, and people. The Spinner study had a very nice graph where they showed the day people finish the treatment, the next day there's this huge spike in discharges. So we know that happens. Solidarity study, again, is only preprint and hasn't been peer reviewed. And it's unclear the standard of care provided, and it's unclear whether that applies to the supportive care that we provide. So there are many factors to consider when you evaluate these, and so when you evaluate a clinical trial in the population, the allocation, the assessments, the sources of systemic bias. The larger sample size with that Solidarity had helps address some of the statistical uncertainty, but it doesn't address all the uncertainties about the trial. So how do I really wrap up Solidarity versus ACT? I think there is no perfect trial. I mean, there are shortcomings with every trial. There are no trial results free from uncertainty, and the p-value helps you quantify that uncertainty, but there's all sorts of other areas of uncertainty. And so we have to consider the totality of the data and the quality of the data. Bigger trial helps some, but it doesn't, but a bigger trial with more uncertainty is not necessarily better. So does remdesivir improve mortality? I think the current data is that there's no mortality benefit. Is it helpful based on Act 1? Yes, I think it's helpful. And I would say solidarity doesn't negate Act 1. I think these are just, you have to use these together to understand the value of remdesivir. So just to wrap up, I would say solidarity has benefit for hospitalized subjects, time to recovery, multiple secondary endpoints. We weren't powered to show any one subgroup. With 1,000 subjects, it was still small to show that sort of benefit. The smallest benefit was those in mechanical ventilation, as we discussed, and I think the emerging paradigm, we would all agree that probably makes sense. Remdesivir has not been shown to have a mortality benefit, but I would say that the clinical benefits translate to less resources, and those are especially important during strained healthcare systems like we see in a pandemic. So again, just like the recovery trial, this is a huge amount of work by a huge amount of people, many sites, 10 countries. This is a list of them, and with that, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you to Kenneth as well. We have time for maybe a couple of questions for you on the set. Maurizio, Joseph, Armand.
If I can just make a comment, is during this pandemic we've seen so many treatments and drugs thrown without evidence and with observational study and compassionate use of drugs, that it was really refreshing to see when your networks completed these trials, randomized controlled trials. So I would just like to say thank you on behalf of our community.
Armand, Joseph?
Well, I just had a question to Kenneth about your opinion, because I mean the study has a very clear design. It's very well performed and impressive results. In our daily patient care, I mean, obviously dexamethasone is very helpful, but it does not help to every single patient. After using it for a regime of 10 days, if you don't see much beneficial effects, what would you recommend? To go on with it, to stop with it and forget it, or to restart it after a few days? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, I should caveat my answer by saying that the simple answer is we don't know. We don't have hard evidence on which to base that judgment. It's something that we've debated a great deal in my unit, I'm sure in many others. We know that dexamethasone has a massive effect on mortality. It clearly suppresses the underlying pathophysiology of COVID-19. And if the patient looks the same at 10 days as they did on day one, then I think it's logical to continue. But at that point, it's a clinical judgment. And in some patients, of course, other factors have taken over. In many cases, by that point, we suspect secondary bacterial infections. And so we have to make a clinical judgment.
Okay.
Okay. Armand?
Yes. Well, I share the congratulations that Maurizio just did. In my view, you are just heroes to have performed such a study in such difficult times and studies that the world was waiting for. Of course, a little bit disappointing that for us as intensivists, as for you, John, that remdesivir was not reducing mortality, despite the fact that mortality is quite high in the population. And the other thing is, of course, that there is no study now with the combination of dexamethasone and remdesivir. So I would like to ask you, how would you see that we proceed? What would be the next step?
Yeah, I think it's almost impossible to go back and evaluate the combination of remdesivir and dex, because they each have shown benefits. So at least in the US, it would be very difficult to conduct that sort of study. But you're right, we actually have no evidence of how they work together. Now, the sweet spot for dex, as was stated, is those on mechanical ventilation. That's the biggest benefit. That's the place we had the least benefit. So I actually think that the combination intuitively makes sense, that early when there's viral replication, there's remdesivir, late when there's inflammation, there's dexamethasone, but we have no data to actually support the use of them together. But I don't think we can go back and fix that at this juncture.
Kenneth?
Well, thank you. So I agree completely with John. Thank you for your kind words. Of course, they're primarily directed at the leadership of the study, Peter Horby and Martin Landry, and a huge team of people. I think we're going to have to accept in COVID-19, as we have for decades in critical care medicine, that there are some things that we're not going to have evidence for. Because, of course, we're now not going to randomize patients to not receive dexamethasone. Our objective, I think, has to be to improve upon the substantial mortality benefit that we've already seen. I personally think in intensive care, that means more targeted immunosuppression and finding ways to target the inflammatory injury to the lungs without harming the immune response to clear the virus and other pathogens like bacteria and fungi.
Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'd like to thank you warmly for being with us, Dr. Kenneth Bailey and Dr. John Beigel. Thank you again. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on all of our lives, of course, over the last year. It has affected our countries, our work, our colleagues, our families, your patients' families, of course. For each and every one of us, at different levels, of course, it has been an emotional roller coaster to hear how the pandemic actually affected us. We have united a very diverse international panel today. We have with us Flavia Machado, Professor and Head of the Intensive Care Section of Anesthesiology, Pain and Intensive Care Department at the Federal University of Sao Paulo in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Nice to see you, Flavia. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you for the invitation.
Great. We have Sheila Mayatra from the Department of Anesthesiology, Critical Care and Pain at the Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai in India. Sheila, you're with us. Are you good?
Yes, thank you.
We have Janet Victoria Diaz from the World Health Organization, who is the clinical management lead for COVID-19 and who was also involved in supporting various aspects of the World Health Organization's response to Ebola. Janet, are you good?
Yes, thank you. Happy to be here.
Great. And we have Enrique Terol, Policy Officer in the DG Santé Unit B3 of the European Commission. Enrique, can you hear us?
Yes. Good morning. Thank you.
Loud and clear. So, dear friends, thanks so much for giving us some of your precious time. We want to hear your story. The COVID-19 pandemic has presented multiple challenges to the healthcare system around the world. First of all, I'm going to head to India, to Sheila from the Tata Memorial Hospital. When the first wave hit you in India, Sheila, how did you apprehend this situation and how did you feel at that given time?
Thank you. So initially there was a lot of panic and there was this feeling of fear. We were very disorganized. But with time, what happened was we had a better understanding of the situation. We were better organized and things got sorted out. However, as you know, we are still in the first wave of the pandemic. So we haven't had a break since March. And our healthcare workers have been working continuously, though the number of cases now have been going down in India. There has been no break. So though we are better organized clinically and things are sorted out, people are really exhausted. And though this hasn't been objectively tested, there's a lot of burnout among the staff. So this is something that we are really concerned about at the moment. And though we've tried our best to give them breaks and time off, it hasn't really been possible because we've had a lot of the staff or teams turning positive, going into isolation.
Sheila?
So this has really...
Sheila, are you getting any psychological help to help your staff? How are you coping with all of this burnout?
Right. So this has been quite recently initiated and we are doing counseling. We're also doing it personally for our residents and making a conscious effort because we don't have so many counselors available. So though the hospital has one, we are trying to engage with our residents and with our fellows and ask them about our well-being, something that we weren't doing initially because we were so overwhelmed with the work. But this is something we have started doing on a daily basis, and I feel it will help them. But this is our current biggest challenge.
Great. Great. Flavia, I'm going to go to you now. What were your main priorities when the epidemic broke out, and what did you do to protect your teams? Flavia, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. I think that the first priority was actually the safety of the team, because we believe that the team, of course, everyone was afraid, but if the team felt that they were protected, that the things that they had to do to protect themselves were quite clear,
we believe that we would do this better. So our first priority was training everyone in small groups, but everyone get individual training on how to use PPIs and how to behave inside the units, inside the cohorts. So I think this was our first priority, and I think we did it quite well. We have a very low prevalence of positivity in our team. And so people feeling that they are safe, they are able to work better. And we also reduce burnouts.
Mm-hmm. Armand, maybe you can identify with these witnessing here from these two people in the different countries in India and Brazil. You're in Amsterdam, is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I recognize this, and it also makes me point at the fact that there is the big risk of a disaster that is outside COVID, and that is disaster of exhaustion of all the workers. And that does not only include the people that work in our unit, but also ourselves. How do we protect to get this? Because if we are after a situation after the COVID and then we all exhausted, the patients will still come.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. Let's head over to Janet now from the World Health Organization. You've been leading the clinical management response to a pandemic that we've never, ever experienced before. I mean, this is unprecedented. I guess this is a high pressure job for you. So how was it for you, and how did the clinical and the scientific community support you, Janet? Tell us.
Thank you for the question. Indeed, it has been an extraordinary challenge to put this all together so quickly, like everyone working so hard to try to figure out what are the global goods, what are the products that we need to develop quickly so that frontline clinicians, that ministries, member states have the tools needed to work against COVID in such a rapid time. And I think the time, maintaining quality, maintaining efficiency, and doing that put a lot of pressure. But I have to say the international community, the networks, you guys, others around the world, everyone was ready to work with us, to support us, to join our networks, to join our guideline development panels, to be in the scientific advisory groups that advise WHO. I think so in solidarity, we were able to do it, but I do think it's been quite a difficult journey thus far. Thank you.
Maurizio, you'd like to comment?
I would just like to say I had the pleasure to work with Janet and to see her leadership in this, and it's been incredible what you've been able to do. And I think what the WHO has done is just to go a bit more in the specific. What do you think societies like the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine can do to help the WHO or to fight this pandemic?
I feel the phase we're in, right now is obviously we develop guidelines and we have the support. You actually support us in that process, and many other colleagues. I think country support. I think, there are various countries in the world that need more support with education, with training, sometimes with resources. And I think using the ESICM as a technical network that can support countries, not just within Europe, but outside of Europe. And maybe we can find a way to collaborate and coordinate that type of, because we get many requests to support countries around the world, and maybe that's an opportunity for us.
We will be happy to look at that and see if we can really help.
Okay, so this is a really useful session for us here and for all of you that are watching, I'm sure. Enrique Terol, I'm going to come to you now. You are at the DG Santé. You've been creating a network of clinicals to share information across Europe, and this has been going on for quite a while. So how did this effort play a role in the COVID-19 response, Enrique?
We hope we supported somehow the clinician. It was complicated at a European level to coordinate all the efforts together. The European institutions, they are quite strong in all the action related with medicines, in all the action related as well with surveillance. But we decided to try to help the clinicians at the front line, to put our bit there. And what we did was using the experience of the European reference networks, which is a highly specialized system in Europe. And we contacted also with the professional societies in order to put the knowledge of all of them together and to provide the clinicians with elements to help them in their clinical work. Actually, the European Society of Intensive Care Medicine was one of the players, or preferred players to work with, and they had a fundamental role in this support to the clinicians.
Of course. Maybe you'd like to comment, Joseph?
Well, my creativity is fading when the hours pass during the opening session, so I was going to ask exactly the same question Mauricio asked to Jeanette, to Enrique, from a different perspective, because Enrique, you know, everybody is asking what is European Union going to do, I mean, for us. And then we just want to switch it back. We have done certain things, of course, to DG Santé, but what can we do further? What do you expect us to do so that our help will be maximum?
I will say that one of the most successful programs is the training program. We agreed with you in order to provide skills, intensive care skills, not only to the, of course, to the intensive care doctors and professionals, but all the doctors, nurses that are around in the hospitals, around the intensive care units, and are working with you. No, that was agreed with you, and I think that now the development of this program is being a fundamental element for the second wave management, and also to probably you were referring at the beginning with the emotional impact. No, it's not the same to be ready to know what to do, how to help, than staying there with all the stress, trying to help you in the intensive care units. I think that that's fundamental.
Okay, it's heard, and thank you so much, Enrique, for sharing with us. As we were preparing this round table with Armand, we were talking about moral injury, and what Armand explained to me about that was the feeling that you can't do everything in your power to help your patients. You kind of feel this guilt kind of thing because you don't have the means to help them. I'm coming to you on this question, Sheila. Did you feel that?
Yes, indeed. In fact, the challenges were really unique. And one of the biggest challenges we faced after we got sorted was that we couldn't engage so much with the patients and the families. So the patients felt very isolated. We couldn't, because, initially because of limitations of PPE, we couldn't have the families visiting them. And this was a real challenge because, they were so much in isolation. We couldn't, we had not much control on the situation. We couldn't spend as much time with the patient as we wanted to. And I'll tell you one interesting episode. I wanted to, communicate with some of the patients, and I said I should make a conscious effort to do this. And I started speaking with one patient on a daily basis, and I realized that the next day, the patient didn't identify that I was the same person. And that's when I realized we are looking at them as normal patients, but they are looking at us all in PPEs, and we look all the same. And after that time, I started putting my name and putting a picture in front of me so that they could relate to us. So I think isolation and lack of effective communication has been the biggest challenge we're really facing with patient care during this pandemic.
How do you feel about that, Maurizio? It's a similar feeling for you?
I completely relate. The biggest challenge for us with the restrictions of family visiting has been not having families there at the bedside. Not just when patients die, everyone talks about that. We want families there for the patient to heal, to be cured and to go out of the intensive care. And also the communication has been a huge problem, exactly for the issues. What we like to say is that we learn to smile behind the masks and with our eyes, but it's not really the same thing.
Of course.
Can I just add something to that? Because this is a very important issue, especially when we are becoming or trying to become more and more friendlier to our patients and the family. I mean, we have seen cases that because we could not let the family go in daily to look at their loved ones, you saw at a certain moment that when they were allowed to go in because the patient was in a very bad state or maybe they were dying, they could not recognize their patient because it was changed so much. ICU changes people, but if you are there daily, then you see the change slowly and gradually. But in this case, after 3 weeks, you can't even see, realize that it's your family member. That was very sad.
Yes, very, very difficult. Armand?
Yeah, I would be very curious to know, because we hear about, in fact, the suffering of the healthcare workers, that they have the feeling they cannot do what they think is best for the patient and what they normally do. And this can be detrimental for the healthcare worker, for the nurses and for the doctors. So I would be very curious to know, how do you deal with it, especially, Sheila, as I understand that for you the first wave is still continuing. This is really a big battle of exhaustion, and how do you deal with it? Do you have tips and tricks for others that you have learned? And also for yourself, of course.
I think one of the important things that we've learned is that it isn't really possible to be a hero at all times, and there are limitations, and you also need to take care of yourself. Because a lot of my colleagues who tried to be very heroic, got infected, and then we had limited staffing. So, distribution of work, better planning, organization, and repeated counseling and getting help from other services. I think this has been a real strength for us, because we started with training doctors from other specialities. I work in a cancer hospital, so we had medical oncologists, surgeons, etc., being trained. So we started getting them into the intensive care unit to health stuff. I think that has been a really useful resource, because we don't have as many intensivists in the country as we would have wanted, especially initially when we were overwhelmed with the situation. So this has really helped us here.
Yeah. I'm going to go to Flavia now. Flavia, the crisis obviously takes a big toll on your personal life. You can't just leave your problems at work, as maybe it was a little bit easier to do that beforehand in some ways. But now, I mean, we're all going through this crisis together. Everywhere you go, when you walk around the shops, you're thinking about COVID. And you're also, as a doctor, thinking about protecting your family. How did you deal with looking after your loved ones?
Well, we are wearing strict isolation at home, and I believe that most of doctors in our team did the same. And my kids, they have 20 and 18, and they were just self-locked down for all this time. And I believe that it was at least good that on the last couple of 3 or 4 weeks, we had a relaxation of this, because it is quite complicated, and I believe also generating burnout to be inside the house for so long. So now they went out a little bit, and now they are locked down again. They self-lock their mind. Yeah. So I think that one of the things that make things better in our families is to give them feedback and to tell them what we were doing. So I had the chance to share with my family some of the bad cases, because sometimes I was crying at home, and I had the chance to share with them the good things, like what we did in our 100 discharge party at the unit, or I always show them the videos and the nice messages that the patients and their families, those who die or not, send to our team. So I think that one of the secrets is to get our family participating with us in this fight and get them proud of what we are doing, because then we're going to be easier for all. And the energy that our family gives to us when we do this, it's absolutely fundamental to keep going. Mostly now that we know that we have faced everything.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, after hearing Sheila and Flavia, I recalled certain things from the beginning of the year, because if you look at the literature, one of the most important issues when you are preparing to such a big, major problem is to have knowledge. And the knowledge is not only medical knowledge, but knowledge is also about the seriousness of the situation. When I recall my own country, I know that this was taken much too lightly at the beginning of the crisis. And everybody was trying to convince everybody that this was not a big problem, this would pass immediately, maybe we will not be affected. And we know from the literature that this is the worst thing you can do, for catching people completely unprepared. The normal way of behavior is just to tell them what is expecting us. And that's why I think we were all hit very badly during the first crisis, but at the second one, we knew what was going to happen to us, more or less. I just wanted to emphasize that as an important issue. I don't know whether there are any other ideas on this.
No, I could relate a lot to what was said about healthcare workers being tired and exhausted, because in the past with intensive care we had experience of traumas or accidents, train accidents. We are very involved for 2-3 days, but then actually things get better. We may have a bad flu season, but no one has ever had so many pneumonias in the intensive care like now. And at the beginning we were looking at this like a 100-meter sprint, and now we know it's a marathon. Actually, it's a long marathon. And we really have to find, every possible way to give rest to our teams, to give them way really to have energy for a long time, because we don't know for how long this is going to last.
I can see that Janet is nodding her head. She agrees with you, Maurizio. Janet, I'm going to come to you. What would you like to say? You've got a lot of intensivists watching you here today, Janet. What kind of message would you like to give them?
Rest. So I agree with Maurizio. It's more than a marathon. It's like sequential marathons. So I think you have to rest. I think you have to remember to take care of yourself and do that well, which means sleep, eat, exercise, get outside in nature, get some fresh air, be with your family. I think that's the most important thing.
Okay, and I'm going to come to Enrique as well. I need to come and see you at the European Commission there. Maybe you'd like to give a message. We're coming to the end of our talk, but a message to those that are watching us today. What would you like to say?
I will say that we have to be humble and to learn from the experience. And as it was said, we need to be cautious in having a vision of the future. We need to be ready, and that means we need to learn how to make the system more resilient and how to support the healthcare professionals. We can not only wait that the healthcare professional will behave as heroes, as they have been behaving. We have to organize things. We need to develop new skills, and we need to learn from this capacity of adaptation. We need to be able to reorganize the hospitals, the services, and to have that prepared. Because the intensive care doctors and all the doctors in a hospital, they have been able to they completely change the organization of a center just in days or in weeks. But that has to be prepared. That has to be prepared so that you can trigger that, and immediately you can change the system and have enough resources and enough capacity to deal with the situation.
Okay.
Thank you, Enrique. Just to finish off, we have very little time left, but I'm just going to come quickly to Flavia and then to Sheila. But Flavia, first of all, maybe you can tell us to finish in short. What was the moment that touched you the most? The moment that, what kind of message you would like to share with us, or anecdote to finish, Flavia?
Certainly the moment that touched us most was when we lost one of our doctors. He worked in the unit for 20 years. And so this was the worst time at all. And we need a lot of energy and feedback to get the team working nicely again with pleasure and being proud of what they do. So I would say that my last message is this: always give feedback to the team. There were times in the unit that we look around and see everyone here is going to die. Residual lethality rates for people in mechanical ventilation is 60, 65, sometimes 70%. So there were times that this was quite difficult. And we changed and we start to give positive feedback. We start to count lives. So there was a time that every patient that was discharged in the ICU, the patient or one of us put a small heart, a paper heart, in a board. So we are counting lives. We count the first 100. We count the second 100. And now we're counting the third 100 lives that we contributed to save. So I think that we have to change the way of doing this, not talking too much about those patients that we are losing, but rather talk about the patients that we are saving.
Thank you, Flavia. I'm going to ask the same question to Sheila. I come to you for the maybe the moment that moved you the most or the most positive moment, but what would you like to share to finish?
So initially there was just so much fear and panic, and it really made me wonder, how would India really cope with this? You know, we have limited resources, limited ICU beds, you know, the residents, and this was really a challenge. And what really touched me is the way you know, every person, not only the intensivists, but every member of the hospital, even outside communities, patients and families kind of came together and were working together. We hadn't seen this kind of you know, unity, even politicians, different religions. It was kind of a unifying experience of working together. And we never really seen that in a country which is so multicultural and so diverse, where there are so many differences of opinion. And that was indeed something that touched me a lot. People did that extra bit, you know. We had, you know, residents who had turned positive and had worked you know, for a while, and you know, even after immediately turning negative, they came back to work. No one was asking for the extra leave. Now, all this was really, you know, something that touched me so much, because I had never experienced this in India before. And if you see the mean age of India, median age is only 27. So we have a very young population, which is mostly working and students, and we're still in a partial lockdown. So to keep such young people at home was really a challenge. And to have people even from home, even from different quarters, coming out, doing their bit, even online, was something that really touched me and overwhelmed me.
Thank you for sharing, Sheila. And thank you to all of you for sharing with us. I'm going to give a last word to each of you. Armand?
Yeah, I think this was also a very big lesson in modesty, because especially in the rich Western world, we are used to control everything and plan everything, and we think that we can really arrange everything, and if we do not know something, we just ask an expert. But with COVID, there were no experts. They were not existing, and we were looking for the literature and a randomized control trial. There was not such a thing. And it's a big lesson, I think, for the whole world to know that things cannot be planned, and that we are really very humble beings, and we are now confronted to this, and we are going to do better with the vaccination that will arrive, to my conviction. So I think that is one of the lessons of the COVID.
Great. Well, Maurizio?
Just for example, just being on this round table, I think is the symbol of how we got together and united as a community. You know, after so many months, we still don't have a lot of specific therapies for this virus, but we know much more of what's working and what's not working, because we've been sharing continuously all around the world through these networks, through events like this. And I really think, you know, sharing this way, scientific and clinical information is the way forward.
Yeah, great.
Joseph, the last word for you.
Yeah, I think we have heard things here which are actually universal. We all have experienced these sort of things. The only thing I would like to add is that we are excellent in reacting, as we have heard, but we are not very good in proacting, and that is the prevention of all these things happening. Okay, the first one was we were unprepared, but we still know that you can prevent this with normal behavior in the street, at home or wherever, and as we have always repeatedly told, even in this session at the beginning, the prevention is not at the door of the intensive care. It begins at the public places. So I hope that we make that development also once in the world, that we are more cautious with behaving in the streets and at home.
Of course. Starts with us, right? Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you to all of you that have participated with us, to Sheila, to Flavia, to Janet, and to Enrique for being with us today. It's been a pleasure having you, and thank you for being so generous. Thanks to you as well. I think I'm going to hand over to Joseph for a last word to open officially this Congress.
Well, I think the very last word is simply, let's go for it.
Let's go for it. Well, he said it, let's go for it. But just before, we have a little surprise for you, Joseph. I am going to just disappear. This is a disappearing act. And I'm up again. Here we go. Maurizio, You can tell us what I've got here.
Well, what you have there, it's a recognition that usually at the General Assembly, which is always on Tuesday evening at 6:30, the members of the society gave to the president at the end of the mandate. So unfortunately, the General Assembly will still be happening, but it's digital at 6:30 on Tuesday. But I'm sure that the members, Joseph, will be very happy that you received this recognition today. So on behalf of every ESIC member, congratulations and thank you for your leadership.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very honored to receive this. And I must say that the last 2 years, it was a great privilege for me to serve the society. Of course, with great help of my colleagues in the executive committee, and especially you, Maurizio, as the president-elect. And thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Joseph, and thank you to all of you today. As Joseph said before, let's go for it. For me, it's good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let's go for it.